Hello, everyone. Today we have Meg Galletti in the house, and she is a friend of mine and also the founder of Blois Consulting. And welcome, Night.
Thank you so much for having me, Sasha.
I am excited that we have a chance to talk to you because I know you have such an interesting career journey, and I know the students could learn a lot, probably relate to some of your experiences also.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, I feel very fortunate. Like I was in the right place at the right time for a lot of my career journey. So
I'm sure your positivity, your personality had a lot to do with it.
oh, sweet. Thank you. Thank you.
So without further ado, how about we jump into it and maybe you can kind of start us from the beginning of your career journey.
Absolutely.
However you defined it.
Okay. Well, I mean, I suppose my love of travel and different cultures came long before I was thinking about a career. My mom was very committed to our traveling outside of a culture of our own and to learn about different cultures and the vulnerability and the acceptance that requires. And so I'm super grateful to her for that. And so I guess that's really where it began. I graduated in a time when there were no jobs. It was very difficult to find a job, perhaps not unlike now in some instances. And I truly believe it's one of the best things that happened to me because I graduated in Soviet studies. I went on to work on it was interesting. I went on to work on my master's in Russian. And at one point I said, I've had enough. I have work. Like I have to be around people. And so I took a job here in Baltimore, in fact, at an opening hotel, which is now the Baltimore Marriott. I was the number 2 person in the HR office, of which I knew nothing. I hadn't studied for HR. And within about 3 weeks, the number 1 person was asked to leave. And so I was the number 1 and number 2 person in a pre-opening situation. So I learned quickly. And I really kind of liked that. And I liked HR, and I never thought that would necessarily be my path in any way. But it was. And so I continued with Marriott. I spent some time in independent hotels and found myself eventually in Chicago as a director of HR for 4 seasons and did a lot on it. We opened the hotel, which was lovely. I worked with a general manager who was brilliant and tough, and that was good for me. I have to tell you, honestly, I went home for the first year crying. And suddenly I thought, I think I'm good at what I do and I'm happy to learn, but he's like, I'm not going to do that anymore. And it was a real turning point for me in my career because I found a confidence that I think we all have to find at one point or another. And it served me well. I continued in that hotel that did a lot of corporate work and training and development. And eventually when we internationalized and acquired a company called Regent Hotels, which was based in Hong Kong, I was selected to take that role. And so it was fantastic. I loved every minute on it. Sorry, please go ahead.
Oh, no, it's fantastic. So just to make sure that we understood you, that was a very tough role and then helped you find strength in your abilities.
It absolutely did. And I think it helped me find my confidence because I think I knew my strength, and I think he knew my strength. He was probably the best mentor I've ever had. But he pushed me, and that was a good thing. Ultimately, it was a really, really good thing. And I'm grateful for that. He became and still is a very good friend. And he was a huge support for me as I grew in the company. In fact, he is the one who handed me the letter for the role in Hong Kong, which meant a great deal to me.
Yeah, I love you.
Yeah, well, and I loved him too in many ways. From difficult, challenging times come really good things.
Yeah.
I think. So I found myself in Hong Kong. I was there in aggregate for probably 30 days a year. And the rest of the time I traveled. So we had 12 hotels, 11 of which were in Asia and in the South Pacific. And then we had the Regent Beverly Hills. So on occasion we would fly back and obviously had meetings in that hotel and connect with the teams and whatever.
I Beverly Wilshire, you said, right? I actually showed students in my other class a video about that, so I know that's a really beautiful hotel.
It's a lovely hotel. I remember arriving as I was on my way to Hong Kong for my new job. I arrived at the Beverly Wilshire. I spent the night there, and I remember them knowing me as I got out of the car. No, I'd never been there. Over time, we knew each other. Meg, you must be Meg Galletti. Mr. Hanks said to say hello to you, blah, blah, blah. And that was something so special, I think, about connection that is made in all industries, but in the hospitality industry for sure. And I'm grateful that I started there, candidly. I spent time there for about 4 years in Hong Kong, growing new hotels and really growing the internationalization of Four Seasons. So Four Seasons prior to that had a property in Nevis and a property in London, but that really wasn't the international arena. So it was a huge time of learning for us in the field and for the remainder of the corporate team in Toronto. So right place, right time. I learned a ton very quickly about building an international discipline and really growing an international workforce and balancing local culture with corporate culture, which was super exciting to me and difficult sometimes, but really very interesting. And what's so interesting, I think, also is that we can work to believe the same things, to strive for the same things, no matter where we come from, when we believe it in and we see the value. And yeah.
I'll follow with you on that a little bit later. Okay. So what specific, were you in HR in that role or was it?
I was. So I was an area director of HR for Asia and the South Pacific at that time. And over time, was promoted to the VP for all non-American properties in HR and training and development. And then I had recruitment for the company as a whole. Yeah.
Okay. And so you focus on hiring new people, training them.
I did. And really pulling those teams together. So those 12 hotels in the beginning all functioned very separately. And so they didn't have the ability to support one another, to grow collectively versus growing individually. And so this conceptually was huge for Four Seasons and really big for those hotels because they can know one another. I remember kind of sitting down with the senior HR directors in those properties. I pulled 4 together initially. We wrote policies, procedures, training, etc. And they'd never met. I mean, one lived in Sydney, one in Melbourne, one in New Zealand, in Auckland, and then one in Hong Kong. And it was fascinating to me that you work for the same company and you're so close, and yet they were so insular. So it was super helpful, I think, to me, and I hope to them as well, and certainly to the company to grow differently. It was a huge ton of growth and very difficult, I think, especially for those in North America, in that they had little experience in Asia. So there was a lot of learning about each other, and we made a lot of mistakes, as you do. That's how you grow. I think we got right in the end. Yeah.
Yeah, I will definitely follow up with you on that later.
Okay. Of course.
So I think this is just your overall career trajectory, and then I'll be back to sound the
perfect points. Perfect. Of course. So I spent time with Four Seasons, at which point I had the opportunity to join Rosewood Hotels and Resorts, which I did as a VP of HR. At a time, I found myself throughout my career in situations where the organization was doing something new. It had been acquired, or it was expanding in a different way, or it was just time for reimagination. So in this case, I went on to Rosewood. I was based in Dallas, but had properties again all over the world. This was at a time of a joint venture partnership for Rosewood. And so the outlook was different. The need to grow was greater. And again, a number of diverse properties across the country, across the world, with people who didn't really who knew their property and didn't know the rest. So a lot of my role was building in infrastructure with those teams to support the growth of the company and to support the way in which we all work together, and training development to support that as well. And then I moved on. I had my son. And so all of that international travel, I kind of put aside for a little bit and joined a property called Sea Island in Georgia. This was a fourth generation company focused on hospitality and also on kind of golf course clubs and that kind of thing. And I spent 4 years there, again, as the VP of HR. At this time, the company was kind of moving from being a fourth generation family owned organization to one that was positioned over time for sale. And so it had to become a business and not a family owned business. And so again, we built infrastructure. And my role was to build infrastructure within HR, training, development, culture, that supported the organization as a whole. And I think it's probably important to say, Sasha, that I was very fortunate to start at Four Seasons where HR was part of the executive committee and part of strategic thinking. And so this isn't always the case in human resources, for sure. But I was spoiled at the beginning. And so it made it easier for me to weigh in strategically. And I hope as a good business leader as a result of that. So that role in particular, it was very important to be connected with my peers on an executive team to make decisions that supported the way in which we grew and what our outcomes and returns were ultimately. So I spent some time there. I took a little break and moved to Italy with my husband, who an engineer by education, and was doing a development project between Chianti and Siena. And so I did some consulting during that time, and I spent a little bit of time in my son's school. So I needed something to do. I found it very hard not to work.
Yeah, after hopefully exactly good years.
Yeah, it felt very uncomfortable, actually, if I'm honest. And so I found myself back in another role with a company called Six Senses Resorts and Spas based in Bangkok. I was working with someone that two people that I spend time with in Four Seasons. Yeah, which is in the hospitality industry, you always come right back around. And so there it was. And at this time, the company had been acquired by a private equity firm, very focused on sustainability. And so Six Senses is very focused on sustainability, both social and environmental sustainability, but at a very high level in the market. And so all of these properties were outside the U.S. I think they're seeing their first Six Senses resort in South Carolina this year.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So again, kind of reimagining, re-looking at the culture, kind of rebuilding the culture. I have a funny story if you want to hear it later on about that. But huge focus on really understanding and committing to the culture of the organization, because it clearly is the platform for the way in which the organization would grow sustainably. So it mattered substantially. And again, just kind of reimagining the function and bringing people along with us. We spent, in all of those roles, I spent a lot of time with our HR directors, our training directors. We met together at least once a year, and we built our futures together. We talked very much about what would happen next. And I think we had a lot of ownership in that regard. So I spent time there. I eventually, because of needs with my family, needed to be in the States more often. I commuted once a month to Bangkok for about 2 years, originally from Italy and then from here in Maryland. But over time, went back into a consulting role. I was a fractional chief people officer in a couple of different environments. I started first with the private equity firm that had acquired Six Senses. I spent time with their portfolio companies working specifically on culture, helping them with their HR structure, but more specifically helping them to define their culture and to work toward a really authentic culture. And so I worked in recycling, which was fascinating to me. What a challenging job and so fascinating to learn about. But we don't realize when we put something in the recycling bin what it takes to get it, to where it needs to be and how difficult that job is. So there were tons of challenges in terms of retention of those individuals, helping employees to feel really important about the work that they're doing. And when you're digging through recycling, it's hard to feel that way. Yeah. Also, a little bit of time in a really interesting lighting company. And again, we were building culture there, but helping to kind of build the company as well. Sari is fascinating, healthy lighting and sleek lighting in particular, and a couple of other things with the portfolio companies. And then I ended up as a CPO with Yale, which is a series of companies, a collection of companies managed by the founder of GoDaddy, Bob Persons. He's from Baltimore. And YAM, by the way, it's for Euromess, which apparently is a popular phrase here in Baltimore. I didn't know that. So MNGT company, I didn't know it until I was out there with them. But very interesting, a collection of very diverse companies from a very high-end golf course and hospitality business to PFG, which makes amazing golf clubs for anyone who's a golf enthusiast, to some really interesting kind of retail opportunities, and then a very nice foundation to kind of help and support others. So that too is interesting. There, you were also building structure and building a collective culture across 12 different separate companies, which was interesting. But I found myself back here in Baltimore as a CPO for a national autism company. My first kind of foray into the medical world, into healthcare. I've been inspired by many things, but the work that behavior techs do with families and children with autism is phenomenal. Also, because it's such a difficult job, there's a huge issue with retention and very, very high turnover. So this became a real focus for us. I also was the first chief people officer that had ever existed in that company. And so it was new for everyone, Then it was a little unusual to understand why there would be someone in the HR role at kind of senior level in that organization. That organization had also grown from a very small one with maybe 500 employees to 10,000 when I left over the course of about 5 years. And so that pace of growth is really difficult for a lot of organizations and the people in it to kind of adjust. Mm-hmm. So that is that pretty much. And I finished. I learned I had some family business that I needed to manage, which I did. I didn't know I could do that either, but I did. And I, over the course of the last year, have kind of imagined a consulting firm that is primarily based on helping organizations find their authentic culture and to make their environments healthy, with great outcomes in the end.
Yeah, no, that's easy because culture, I feel like if you get the culture right, everything else is easy, relatively. But if you don't get that right, you're going to have a fire every week, every other day, and you might not know how to put it out.
That's right. Well, because I think real culture, so many organizations talk about culture in terms of their mission or their vision or their values and their words that live on a wall or on a card somewhere.
We have to check up on what it is.
Exactly. But in fact, culture is what we do every day. It has nothing to do with what we say we do. But the fact is how we interact with each other every day. That is our culture. So we have to know what that is. And by the way, it isn't always great. And that's opaque. Knowing it isn't great and finding ways to make it what we want it to be collectively, that I think that's the answer to health and culture.
Yeah, it's an amazing career journey. Yeah, it's, how they say you can't make the step up.
That's great. I feel, I don't know that I would have planned any of those things. I did not know what my career path would be. And I fell into a discipline that I really loved.
Yeah.
So I know the stars aligned somewhere, but I'm grateful that they did. And maybe I had a little bit of something to do.
I'm sure.
But I feel super, super grateful for being kind of worried.
What advice would you give for students?
What?
Especially today, as you mentioned, you graduated a tough time. I actually also graduated December 8th. So what advice would you give students? And especially maybe some things that you learned along here for sure.
Well, I think the first thing is to not despair when things don't work exactly the way you want them to work. I mean, I stopped counting rejection letters at 100 because I decided it was no longer healthy and helpful. And I found ways in which to put myself in a work environment. I didn't make money. I worked right over there at the World Trade Center in the Sister Cities program for Baltimore for a while as a volunteer. I wrote speeches for the mayor of Baltimore for a bit of time. I did get paid a little bit for that. And it was interesting. But it was nothing that I ever planned to do or thought that I would do. It was a connection through that Sister Cities program. But I did it, and I'm glad that I did, because I learned things that I otherwise wouldn't have. It was not the path I was intending. I don't know what path I was intending, but it certainly wasn't to write speeches for the mayor of Baltimore. But I think one big piece of advice, I think, is we all have this idea of the road that we will follow.
Yeah.
And there are lots of detours along the way. And I think if you're not willing to take them, either because you have to, because the labor market is tight and this is the thing that's available, or because you really know you want to do something else and you want to buzz past, I think if you don't take those detours, you'll really know what it is you want to do. If someone had said to me, you will be in HR and you will live in Hong Kong as your kind of first big job, I would have been like, yeah, no, that's not on my plan. Mm-hmm. But in fact, I'm glad I took the detour. So yes, I think that's one piece of advice. Don't be so focused on the end goal that you miss what happens in between, because maybe it takes you in a more meaningful or completely unknown direction that you actually find passionate. I do have to say I'm super passionate about what I do, and
that's hard.
I wouldn't have thought that if you had asked me. I'm not saying how many years ago, but if you had asked me many years ago, and I was, looking for work, yeah, I don't think I would have been ever imagined that I could be passionate about HR. But I for sure, I am more passionate about the culture, people, growth, strategic side than I am about other components of the function. But it takes a holistic how to pull that together. We love and enjoy and are good in different things. I think the other piece of advice is don't give up. Don't get out when you're looking and you can't find what you want, or you're being rejected now, oftentimes rejected by AI without the ability to talk to someone. Find another way to be seen, find another way to be heard. You have a great LinkedIn profile. Write a blog, write about the things that matter to you. Yeah. So, the people can hear you when they don't have the opportunity to sit like this and to have a conversation. I do some pro bono work with the graduating students. And so we go through this journey together, and it's a tough journey, but don't give up. This is my feeling. We learn from everything, the good, bad, and the ugly.
For sure, I agree. I think any experience is good. What I love today is that we do have that platform. I think during my time, you were just the resume, but now there are ways, like as you mentioned, the blog, writing something, creating some sort of a video about what you're passionate about. That is such an amazing opportunity, and it's in your own hands, right? You don't have to wait for somebody else to give you the permission to do it.
So true.
You can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's kind of fun. And you get your permits when you're waiting for some. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. What do you think helped make you be successful? I mean, I know you say you're at the right place at the right time, but I'm sure there is a lot that you brought to those roles as well.
Well, I mean, I think you have to be vulnerable. I think you have to recognize that, oftentimes you're expected to know things that you know, and you're also expected at times to know things that you don't know. And so I think we're best when we seek to understand and when we have the vulnerability to say, I really don't get that. So I know I'm supposed to know this, but I really don't. So I need help to get there. And, we find our own ways to get there. But I think this is important in leadership in general. Maybe I think it's important in the human race. We know what we know, but we don't know what we don't know. And so if we can't look at that with curiosity, we're never willing to listen. And if we're not willing to listen and kind of expose ourselves, then we stop worrying.
Yeah.
So I think, as you're looking for a job, as you're growing in a role, that's key. It's really key to say, I don't know it all. And that's okay. I feel really good about what I know, and I'm going to share that and contribute that to an organization. But there's lots I have to work. I think that's important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So how did you mentioned there is people from different cultures, different parts of the world. How did you, go about working with them in a productive, successful way?
Well, I think, first of all, we had to get to know each other. And we all had different strengths, which was great. My team in Asia, this is a terrible thing to say, but it will always be my favorite team. Because we were so fundamentally different from one another. And those HR teams, as I said earlier, had no exposure to one another. So we needed something that was common, that kind of pulled us together. And really it was redefining the discipline for the future and finding a way in which we could contribute to that. And, I would lie if I told you there weren't some people who said, this is for me. There were three HR directors that said, I don't want to do it this way. And that's fine. We all respected that. But we moved forward with a group of people who had a similar vision and a similar passion. And so that brought us together. And then we began to look at how does that make us similar and how are we different and how will we leverage those differences, right? And how does that inform the discipline, the structure that we're developing? And it allowed us to create a career platform in Asia and in the South Pacific initially for 4 seasons that was a much faster growing opportunity than we saw in the States, because people weren't necessarily willing to leave the States or leave Canada to go to Asia. So those individuals who had been in those properties, who now were work closely together, had great opportunity to grow. They were growing at about 3 times the pace of those in the U.S. Interestingly. Yeah. So you needed a common goal. I think it was building the goal together.
Yeah.
It was ours. And then we were able to take it forward. We also were very clear in working with our teams as a whole. So if we had an HR conference, an annual HR conference with our HR trade people, we did it at the same time as the general manager's conference, so that we weren't isolated. We were talking about things together. We're developing things together. Same thing in Rosewood. As we pulled this teams together. And, there were a few dissenters. I had a general manager in, I won't say here, but in Europe, who said, I think this is just fabulous. These are fantastic ideas. I want the training, blah, blah, blah. And I think it's great for this company, but we won't be doing it. And then I said, hey, really? Unknown person. He's the name. I said, really? Well, can you try it for a year? And is in a year you feel that it hasn't been useful, then you report to the same president I report to. let's put a meeting on the calendar and let's talk about it. And if you feel it hasn't been useful, then I'm not useful and I shouldn't be here. So let's put it on the calendar. And we did. We never met that year later. But I think sometimes you have to encourage people to step out of their comfort zone too, and to accept something new. Change is difficult.
Yeah.
But I think in HR, if we're good drivers, if we're good leaders of change, we take organizations in a different place. So yeah, that was a tangent, but still.
No, but that's part of the challenges that you've dealt with.
For sure.
Which is to be expected by anyone. Not everyone's going to be on board with whatever you do.
No. And I think when you're in a kind of diverse environment, an international environment with so many different cultures, you see more of that until you pull it together, and everybody has voice one way or another. It's key.
And kind of that balance between the home culture versus how they do things in a different locale. How did you go about making those decisions?
You mean in terms of how we would move forward collectively?
Yeah. So how much of it is, okay, here's how it's been done in our central location, parent company, and then, but you do some things a little bit differently, and we see that actually in some aspects of working great for your area. So how did you to make those types of decisions?
Well, we brought some of those ideas back to the home base, if you were. And I do believe that's how the company grew internationally, because, everyone had to think a little differently. So we pushed the envelope. I mean, to answer your question, we really pushed the envelope. We didn't say, this is cut in stone, this is the way we do it. There were tenets to the culture that were important, and they were how we treated one another, how we treated our guests, how we focused on the real intent of hospitality. And those things weren't negotiable because they were how the company functioned and how it grew. But the specifics of how certain things occurred, right? There were a lot of lessons learned as the company grew internationally. We saw a change in leadership at that time. But many of the senior leaders in Toronto, which is where the home base was, were at an age of retirement, and some did, and others really embrace this concept of a new focus on company, because it couldn't be the same. It couldn't grow in the same way without there being an acknowledgement that there was more to learn in the world, and that it was okay to change some of the things that did. So I would be lying if I said, for me, we worked in a way that we matched the way things had always been done. I think we found together a new, maybe more productive way to do it, which was uncomfortable for everybody, to be honest.
I mean, there's so many challenges there. I can't even begin to think about more to start. So,
and you don't know until they hit you, and then you figure it out. So, once you dealt one, the next one's a little easier, and and eventually the company grows together.
So how do you potential? So let's say we were coming to a new place. So we told our culture is not quite where you would like it to be. We don't know what's causing it. Where would you start, and how would you go about that process?
Well, I had a little protocol for that, so I'll share my secret.
Ooh.
First of all, you want to talk to a representative group of the organization. All right. So you would want to understand why there may be a concern about the culture not being as healthy as you want it to be. That in my approach is, of course, I listen to leadership in terms of why they may feel that way and what kind of their benchmarks are. But ultimately, because we know the culture is how we feel every day, what we do every day, I ask 3 questions of a representative group of the organization. So if the organization is 10,000 people, I'm going to try to talk to 500 to 1,000. I want at least 10%. So this exercise is better done for smaller companies, but you get the point. And I ask 3 questions. The first is, what words would you use 1, 5, 10 words to describe your culture today, because this makes it personal.
Yeah.
Right. The second question is about aspirational culture. So 5 years from now, all stakeholders are sitting in the room. What words do you want them to use to describe a culture? And this helps us understand where we are and where we'd like to go. Because now you have ownership for this path from here to here. And also, interestingly, you have ownership for where you are. And that's important because you're never to make a change otherwise. The third question is quirky, but it helps to provide perspective on those two answers. And the third question is, when it's a work day and the alarm goes off, what makes you want to leap out of bed and go to work? And what makes you want to put covers over your head and not get off? And so then you kind of distill all of that. And you may find that there's a substantial systemic issue, or you may find that there just isn't a connection, or the kind of connection that you want. But what I think you'll always find where there's an issue or a perceived issue is what you say you do, what you say you believe isn't what anyone within the organization is living.
Yeah.
And so now you have to find a way to make that work. Generally, I'll pull together a very simple core values from those gurus that people use. And I kind of rank them in terms of what is used most, what is used least. And then we begin to think about a combination of words. I'm making this up, but let's say it's authentic hospitality. Okay. And then everyone needs to define that for themselves. So I've created a workshop where once you have this kind of newer, refined idea based on everyone's words, because we all like to see what we suggested in action, we get groups together, and then based on how we've decided to articulate it, if there are 5 core values, then we break into 5 groups and we say, well, what does that mean to us? So if it's authentic hospitality, what does that mean to me as an employee? What expectations do I have of myself as a leader? Or what expectations do I have of my leader? What makes me comfortable? What makes me uncomfortable? What help do I need to be able to live that and make that part of my decision-making, a part of my daily life? And these groups work together. And then they make a presentation. There are no flip charts or, PowerPoint things allowed, but you have to do something. Your presentation has to be something different. So I've had Shark Tank videos in Vietnam. I had a group who sat together in a circle with light bulbs and talked about reconnection and lit their light bulb each as they told their story for connection. So what you find is this incredibly important outcome because you've been part of it and you don't forget it. That's how you own the culture. And then the decisions that you make are always embedded in that culture, or they aren't, but they are, right? You've got this path to kind of follow. So see how that continues to work. But that's where I found it successful. Yeah.
Let's say there's a pretty big discrepancy between where they want to be and where they are. I know there's so many flavors and ways that can happen, but just generally, how would you take it from there?
Well, I think you have to be really candid, and you have to hope that you have a leadership team that's willing to take that on board and embrace that. And again, that word vulnerability and curiosity kind of plays an important role because you need your leaders to understand and to be willing to take responsibility for how you move forward without and how you bridge those gaps. Sometimes you have to investigate why that is, right? Is it perception? Is it reality? Sometimes you have to dig a little deeper, but ultimately you're going to find yourself in a place where you know what the current situation is. And then you have an acceptance issue. And primarily that acceptance is with leadership. And that's tough. I mean, I would lie if I told you that I didn't work with some leaders who said it was not the case. Who said that?
Yeah.
And sometimes it doesn't work. The reality is sometimes it doesn't work because if you can't get that buy-in at the top, it's never, it will never work. And then, and then that becomes sadly your culture. But if you have that buy-in or you have that willingness to buy in leadership and certainly at the top, then the rest you work through. You have to be honest, and get them to be honest and help them to navigate that. I do sometimes some leadership training to just kind of talk about what our styles are, how we receive information, how we communicate, how we give information, and because that's really important when you need to hear someone else and they need to hear you. So sometimes some of that work has to be done in order to be able to tackle the bigger issue.
Yeah. But that's quite a trapper you have because changing culture, I mean, that's tough. Yeah. And especially, of course, if there's an issue.
Mm-hmm. It is tough. It's tough and it can be uncomfortable, but it can also be incredibly rewarding, as people kind of come along the journey. And ultimately, culture is their cultural journey. It's not mine. I'm an advisor to them. So that helps a little bit.
It's not personal.
So exactly. And so you can be, I think, a little more candid and a little more obvious, especially in a consulting world versus when you're in charge of,
that needs to repay to any
culture because you sit in HR. Yeah, for sure.
Do you find that there is some common breadth or attributes of culture that is just across the board typically works?
I think inclusivity is key because if we don't know how to be inclusive, then we're not hearing everyone. So a commitment to being inclusive is important. I think also maybe the ability to be a bit introspective and to help others to be the same and understand that we have biases and they kind of influence how we hear information, how we act. Is important too. So you have to break those things that are walls. You've got to find a way to break down. Again, easier said than done. But ultimately, we all want to be included. Yeah. So if we look at this and we don't want a bias against us, so if we look at it from a perspective of how we might feel versus you must do, I think there's a better chance for success. But it takes more time.
So you've been exposed to so many different cultures. How did you navigate that? And what are your kind of secret approaches that helped you work with people who are so different or are used to doing things so differently?
Well, I mean, I think on the front end, I think about, and I was fortunate because I had traveled and I had, kind of a connection with the world. But when I had 12 different hotels, one in America, but the others across Asia and the South Pacific, for example, I had a lot of trepidation. I was meeting new people for the first time in an environment that I didn't know. And I was anxious about it and I was nervous and I was uncomfortable. I love meeting people, so that made it a little easier.
Yeah.
And I think, when you realize that ultimately we're all the same, that helps. But I had to embrace my fear. And that's easier said than done. There were plenty of times that I got on the plane at the end of a visit and said, oh my gosh, I can just rest for a minute. Because you don't want to do something that's inappropriate. You're always going to make a mistake. You always will. There's so many cultural norms. You can't know them all. And so I think if you approach it, well, with some vulnerability, but if you approach it saying, I know I'm going to make a couple of mistakes here, so I need you to teach me and you call me out if I get it wrong, because I don't intend to get it wrong. Everything is somehow easier. But it's not, none of that is easy. Super exciting also. Time. I found it difficult because I stayed where I worked. So I worked in hotels, and when I was in my room, I was still at work.
Yeah.
You know, and if I ordered room service, I was dressed because I was still at work. You know, I never answered a door in my row, for example. So yeah.
You never rest.
No, you don't. They alone were that way, I guess, ultimately. Yeah, it's not easy. I mean, but it is so fun.
I mean, it takes the right kind of person. I think you are, knowing it's yourself, you are that kind of person. You're very accepting and you connect with people easily. I just always see how very positive you are. So I think people respond well to that.
Thank you. That's very kind. That's kind. Yeah.
It's true.
Well,
thank you. There was something you said you were going to mention whilst we were talking.
But what was that? Oh, it was a story.
Oh, yes.
Oh, I don't remember. It was. You might have to save this for part 2. What was it?
I'm so sorry. I don't remember. I'm sorry. How we
It's fine. It's fine. We'll come back to it. Maybe I'll have it for the 25th. I'll share it.
Oh, yes. You were sorry in person.
I'll remember.
Yeah. Can I also, it was your career. Your husband seems like he has a pretty high profile career also. How did you go about managing the two?
Well, we met at work, which was interesting. We met in Baldi's, in fact. And so we were in the same industry. And so I think we were fortunate in the sense that we understood kind of the demands of those roles. And we had to live in some ways independently. I mean, we loved our time together, but I was on the road a lot. So was he. And so we learned to make most of the time when we were, together in the same place. And otherwise we shared our stories while we were on the road in one way or another. But I think we were very fortunate in that we really understood the demands of hospitality because we both grew up in it. It made it much, much easier. Yeah, and I was both interested in what he was doing, and he was interested in what I was doing. We worked together twice in our lives when we met, and then again at Sea Island, and he was the VP of engineering, and I was the VP of HR, and I don't know that I would always recommend that, because you live work 24 hours a day in that way, and sometimes you disturb me.
Again, how do you have to leave that at work? But how do you do that? But yeah, it's still the same. You are still here at work.
That's right. Yep.
Interesting. And any last thoughts or insights that you'd like to share?
Well, first of all, I'm so grateful to share the journey. It has been a fantastic one. And I hope that I had something to do with that. But what I would say is our careers they're about us. They're about what we put into what we do every day. But they're also about this desire to keep learning. We talked a little earlier before we started this about this whole concept of reverse mentoring. And I think it's really important, no matter where you are, or whatever stage you are in your career, there's something to learn. If you wake up in the morning and say, I know it all, then it's time to retire and to learn how to knit. I know. But, there's always something to learn, and there's always a new way to look at things, and how it was doesn't mean how it should be. So, yeah, yes, those are
Thank you so much, Meg. I just appreciate your honesty and being open and always being so willing to interact with our students and to share your perspective and your gifts with us. So, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thanks for including me. I really love the things that we do together. I love meeting you students, and I'm here to help celebrate camp. So
thank you so much. You're always a pleasure.